I'm here today with a stalwart warrior in the pro-life movement, Father Frank Pavone, a good friend. He, as you know, ran into some trouble with Pope Francis last year, and he was canceled. And as the year has progressed, we've seen more and more of a cancel culture in the Catholic Church under the pontificate of Pope Francis without appeals. And a lot of people are confused on that. So today we invite Father Frank Pavone on. We're going to talk about Bishop Strickland, pro-life work, and just what's going on in Father Frank Pavone's life. So, Father Pavone, welcome back. Great to see you.
It's great to be back, Taylor. Thank you for having me, as always, and thanks for all the great work that you continue to do.
Awesome. So, just real quick, your initial thoughts on the canceling of Bishop Strickland?
Wasn't surprising. Wasn't surprising at all. You know, no matter what they say, the Vatican is not concerned about his governance of the Diocese of Tyler, Texas. They're concerned about his national influence. And you and I have seen it. Countless faithful have seen it. People know it. He's not called America's bishop for no reason. And it's that they're concerned about. Just like in my case, you know, at first they tried to get me out from the leadership of Priests for Life, but it wasn't that they were concerned about. It was our influence over what you might call the soul of the American Catholic. You know, where's the heartbeat of the American Catholic faithful warrior every day that's making sacrifices to live out their faith? And there's something here that, of course, they neither seem to understand nor care about, which is that, you know, and it goes back to some of the key issues that both Bishop Strickland and you and I and so many others are speaking out about when you see, for example, Biden, you know, and Pelosi, you know, going to communion and saying, oh yeah, this is no problem. What they're missing, some of these shepherds are missing. What about the faithful Catholic who's sacrificing significantly every day to live out their faith? They're giving things up in order to stay in union with Christ, in order to be worthy to receive communion. And of course, we always put worthy in quotation marks. It's not an absolute worthiness, but we live up to the standards that the church sets out, right? So it's like they're making sacrifices to live their faith, and they're looking at these people who are throwing those sacrifices out the window, and then they want to get all the benefits of receiving communion anyway. So it's an insult to the faithful. And it's not a desire to punish anybody. It's an insult. It hurts. So people are looking at people like Bishop Strickland and saying, wow, you know what? I'm encouraged. I'm strengthened. I'm healed. I'm consoled. Let me listen more to what he's saying. The sad thing, isn't it, is that what he has been doing and saying and the way he's been shepherding his diocese shouldn't be getting national attention, because it should be the norm. People should look at it and say, of course, he's a bishop. What else do you expect? But the very fact that he has such national influence and it gets so much attention is itself a condemning commentary on the lack of leadership.
Yeah. You know, what you just said there, Father Pavone, about the hurt, that is one of the things that I don't think the Vatican fully understands, that the layperson, we're talking about moms pregnant with their fifth child. We're talking about dads who are like, how am I going to support this family? We're talking about, you know, grandmothers and grandfathers who their children or grandchildren maybe are not practicing the faith, or even worse, have been, you know, molested. I mean, just horrible things going on. And then on top of that, you have our culture and our politics going towards abortion, going towards agendas of the alphabet soup. We're watching all this happen, and the Catholic layperson, the sheep, looks to the shepherds, their bishop, and their pope. Help us. Help us. Bah, help us. And then we see leaders like you in the pro-life movement, Bishop Strickland as well, and we're like, okay, finally, there's voices out there. You know, in all your work for decades. I mean, I even knew when I was a Protestant 20 years ago, I knew who you were and what you were doing. We see these voices, and then we're like, okay, we have some guys with it. And then down from the Vatican, crack, and these guys are getting canceled. The visceral hurt, and this is where I think these people are so tone deaf up in Rome. They don't understand the hurt of the lay people. Is that
Yeah.
is that your experience, especially as you've talked to people in the last year, as the caller, you've been canceled, you've been defrocked?
Yes, that corresponds with the conversations over the last year, but also over the last 21 years since under Cardinal Egan, this attack on me began, trying to pull me away from Priests for Life. And what is, it's just an absolute not caring. You know, we kept making the case from the time that Cardinal Egan said to me, without any apparent concern for the ministry of Priests for Life, said, "Oh, you have to come back and do parish work." I said, "Don't you realize this is going to be a scandal? Don't you realize this is going to create confusion among people who are going to think, rightly or wrongly, that the church is backing away from pro-life?" It's like they didn't even care, didn't even give the slightest weight to that. And in this latest thing, you know, when you know, this wasn't out of the blue. We saw it coming that they were going to dismiss me from the priesthood, and I said to them, "You don't realize the hurt that's going to cause to people in the pro-life community?" And you know what their answer to us was? "Oh, we have ways of dealing with that." You have ways of dealing with that? What's wrong with you? But you're saying you know there's going to be hurt, and you're going to deal with it instead of prevent it? What ways are you going to have to deal with that? And so it's like these people are way off the track, way disconnected from the grassroots pro-life believing Catholic.
Yeah, that's like two parents getting divorced, and people say, "Well, it's going to really hurt the children." Like, well, we can deal with that. It's like you don't really fully appreciate the nuclear pain that is being inflicted. And, you know, people say, well, if you talk about this, people are going to leave the church. I'm always the first one saying, do not leave the church. Do not jump off of Noah's Ark. Stay within the body of Christ, no matter what. And they're like, well, if you talk about this, people are going to leave. Well, the problem is not talking about it. The problem is the problem. And the problem right now, and Bishop Strickland, I ran the video 5 years ago where he gets in front of the entire USCCB at the USCCB convention in 2018, right after everything on McCarrick came out. And he says, we need to hold each other accountable. We need to go back to the gospel. We need to go back to the catechism. We need to go back to the Catholic teachings. And in that speech, he says the H word. He talks about homosexuality. He talks about seminarians that are at risk. And as I watched that video, I was like, man, they put the target on him 5 years ago for getting up to say that info. Do you agree? Do you think they've obviously been watching you for decades? When do you think they put the sniper rifle on Strickland?
I would say at that point there, that's when I started thinking, wow, the way that he's talking, calling to account, not in a harsh or arrogant way. This is a man, you know, you talk to him a lot directly, as have I. What comes across? His great humility, his great prayerfulness, just his love of Jesus. That is so clear. And so it was not in an arrogant way, but when I saw him really taking to task in an effective way his brother bishops, that was the thought that ran through my mind. They're not going to tolerate this for long, because they never do. They never do. And I think, Taylor, you and I have to start talking about cultish behavior. This has been running through my mind. You know, in a cult, and the Catholic Church is not a cult. Some fundamentalist enemies of the Catholic Church will call us that for theological reasons, but we can put that aside. But I'm talking about cultish behavior in the sense of the way you deal with criticism of authority and the way you deal with members who have been thrown out of the cult. In a cult, no criticism, questioning, or any kind of negative inferences to the authority are permitted. Now, A, that's not healthy. B, that's not Catholic teaching. I always go back to you. I think you and I have discussed it before. I always go back to the book that Russell Shaw wrote some years ago. He used to be the communications director for the USCCB, and the title of his book is Nothing to Hide, and the subtitle is Communion, Secrecy, and Communication in the Catholic Church. Excellent book. I would recommend it to all of our viewers and all of our listeners. And Russell Shaw talks about this. He says, you know what? Why do the bishops make decisions and then not explain to the people the rationale behind the decision. And that is so characteristic of what they did for Bishop Strickland. Oh, no reason was given. Maybe that's because they would be embarrassed if the reason were given, Or in the same case with me, people say, what? Disobedience to Bishop? About what? Blasphemous social communications. About what? I don't know. So it's like, it would be nice if they would explain themselves. But there's that lack of respect for the people under their authority. It's not that we deny their authority. It's a lack of respect for the people under their authority when they make the decisions and give them no rational basis. Even if you look at Cardinal DiNardo's statement, right, the statement he put out about the removal of Bishop Strickland, it's heavy on process, it's heavy on authority, it's completely lacking on rationale. It's like, what is this? Are we a cult? Or are we human beings who can think, who can reason, who can dialogue, who can respect each other, and who can hash out our differences?
Yeah. One of the things that canon lawyers have already been discussing, I want to touch on your case as well, but it also touches Bishop Strickland, and that is to deprive a bishop from his diocese, there has to be a crime. And so far, we've seen no crime. The worst I've seen out there is he was a bad administrator of his diocese. His diocese is not there's dioceses right now being bankrupted, right? He has a lot of seminarians. I mean, I've been over to Tyler. Everybody that I meet down there loves Bishop Strickland out in Tyler. I was there yesterday out in Tyler. Mm-hmm. No crime given. And then on yours as well, you were told something locally by the bishop. You even went to Rome all the way up the ladder to confirm it. Turns out it was not the case. So it's not just, we're not going to say anything. There seems to be some levels of deception. So if you could talk about that with regard to Bishop Strickland and then your own case.
Yeah, what struck me about what he said, now, of course, no reason was given publicly. But then he said, they gave me a whole list of concerns that they had. But you remember him saying, I stand by every one of those? In other words, I wouldn't have done anything different. That says to me, there could not possibly have been a crime there. I mean, how could you say,
I stand by my crime against the church?
Right. I mean, some people do commit crimes. They shouldn't be punished. But it's like, okay, and he gave one example of what one of those concerns was, and that was his articulation of concerns about the synod. Oh yeah, together with a few million other people, right? I mean, of course, concerned about synod. So again, cultish behavior. We can't raise questions anymore in the community, in the family of the church. We can't raise concerns anymore. As you know, canon law itself provides for our right to raise concerns of things that we think are going to be harmful or confusing to the body of Christ. So that we see going on, and it's the same. You know what? It's the same MO when you look at how they dealing with Bishop Strickland, how they dealt with me, and if you switch it over to the civil arena, no matter what our viewers' views might be about President Donald Trump, just from the point of view of cancel culture and weaponization of government, the way he and his associates are treated. Look at, for example, the impeachment process. What was the crime for which they were impeaching? There was none. And they used this vague, abuse of power. What in the world does that mean? That can mean anything. You're not specifying a crime. In all these, 91 charges now that they've brought against him in 4 different indictments, there's not a single crime. There's absolutely nothing there. So the method of going through this is exactly the same in all these cases. You kick up dust, you get somebody in a position of authority, a prosecutor, a judge, a DA, somebody, Congress, whoever you want to get, somebody who has respectable position of authority, you get them to kick up some dust. It's all very vague and confusing, but again, just like Cardinal DiNardo's statement, heavy on process. Oh, you see, we went through all this process. Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything if there's no substance that the process is dealing with. Heavy on process and heavy on authority, boiling down to, why did you do this? Why? Because I said so. It's like, no, that's not, sorry, but that's not good enough. Again, it's not a denial. We're not rebelling against authority. We're staying in union with the church. You know, it's funny, Taylor. Some people have asked me. I've developed a lot of friendships, of course, with folks in all denominations. They say, "Hey, come on over to us. You know, we love you." It's like, no, you don't get it. You know, the Catholic Church was founded by Jesus. I'm going to always remain a faithful Catholic, and in fact, I'm going to always remain a priest ontologically, and I'm going to keep knocking at the door to get my ministry restored. I'm not leaving anywhere, going anywhere, but it's because I said so. I told you. That's not the way authority is supposed to be exercised in the church.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a father. I have 8 kids, and there are times like, well, why do we have to go to this thing? It's just like, well, get in the van, we're going, and I'll tell you later. But you can, if you do that enough, and you're heavy-handed with it, you can begin to break your children. Right. Especially as your children become teenagers and adults, right? You do have the authority, but you're also bringing them into adulthood to think properly, to think lawfully, to think rationally. And so you have to explain, like, well, let's just say a teenager says, well, we don't have to go to Mass every Sunday. And you're like, well, the church says so, and I say so, and you're going. Okay, that is real, okay? But a good father would explain the merits of the Mass, the gift of the Eucharist, transubstantiation, being rightly disposed, going to confession. Like, a good father is going to form the conscience to the child so that hopefully, even if the child is going to reject it, they are rejecting something that has been properly stated and articulated. And I would encourage all Catholic parents and priests watching that, yes, you can appeal to authority, but if you appeal to authority over and over and over and you're heavy-handed and you never give the rationale to it, you can break your kids and you can drive them away. And that is what's going on right now. Is people are being driven away, and they're saying, well, we're the cardinal and we're the pope and all that. And they're not giving the rationale. And then when we look over the aisle and we see bishops in Germany blessing same-sex unions, and we're like, well, why is that? We don't get an answer on that either. And so this is This is the hurt.
I think for our people that are listening now, I want to say to them, this is not only about this abuse of authority against Bishop Strickland, me, or any of the other canceled priests or bishops. I want to say to them, this is about you and your relationship with the church. Because, Taylor, I'm sure you hear it as much as I do. People who will come to us and say, hey, I had this great idea for a special prayer service that we could have in our parish, a rosary march, a pro-life event, handing out some voter education materials. And I brought it to our pastor, and he shut us down, and he said no. And I always say to people like that, okay, we respect the authority of the pastor to decide what will or will not be done by the parish. And then I always say, but I already know the answer. I always say to them, did he give you a reason? And what's the answer? The answer is always no. Always. There's never been an exception to it. No. Did you ask him for a reason? And I think that part of the hurt of what's going on here is that people realize, and maybe they're not articulating or connecting all the dots, but many people are. And they're saying, wait a minute, I'm being treated the same way on the local level in my parish. I'm being treated the same way. And what this does is it discourages people from taking initiative. And it's so at odds, isn't it, with the stated purpose of the synod? Oh, we got to listen to one another more. But they're doing exactly the opposite. It's like if the pastor would only, to sit down, don't just send, and they'll send the no, with just a one sentence letter, or a one word email. It's like, this is not the way we treat one another. Sit down, discuss the matter. And, Russell Shaw, in that book I mentioned, Nothing to Hide, he quotes the Second Vatican Council, some beautiful stuff from John Paul II about how those in authority in the church, and again, this applies to the parish as much as it applies to the Vatican, have to recognize that among the laity, there's a lot of expertise. There's a lot of insight. There's a lot of gifts poured out by the Holy Spirit. There's a lot of knowledge and skill and experience. A wise pastor is going to make use of that and is going to listen to that and is going to respect the input that is given. And again, when you look at the synod, I mean, it's such a bundle of contradictions. You know, on one level, when those things are being said, that hey, laity really have a lot to offer in the leadership of the church, it's like there's a real truth to that. Except that then they turn around and throw it in the garbage. It's like, no, really listen to people, and then maybe you can make your decision in a way that's maybe let the church benefit from what these people have to offer, or what these movements have to offer, like the pro-life movement.
Yes. Now, they took a different approach to Bishop Strickland than they did to you. Bishop Strickland, of course, he's a bishop. He was removed from his diocese. They did not suspend him. They did not restrict him, and they definitely didn't laicize him or remove him from priestly ministry. They kind of went for the jugular, Father. They really hit you hard, you know?
Well, I'll tell you, yeah. And
they threw everything at you. And why is that going to happen to Strickland eventually if he keeps, speaking and traveling? Or why did you get nuked?
Yeah, here's one of the reasons for the difference, and that's a good observation. Remember what they did with Bishop Strickland. First, they did a visitation. Mm-hmm. Now, they did a visitation for me, too. They did a visitation of Priests for Life. This was like 10 years ago, 11 years ago. It was actually a very positive experience. I mean, a visitation can be something very positive. We had a conservative bishop doing it. And that makes all the difference, who's the visitator. And, a visitation can be of a blessing for a ministry, for a parish, for a diocese, for a religious order, where they come aside you. And if they come aside you in the right spirit and say, how can we help your ministry serve the church better? And you do the whole thing in a spirit of solidarity and humility, you can benefit from it. And what ended up at the result of our visitation, they had some recommendations. They always will have recommendations, but they made the point that none of it was obligatory. So they didn't find anything that we were doing wrong that they had to say, no, you can't do this, or yes, you have to do that. It was all optional suggestions and recommendations. Okay, so maybe the Vatican wasn't so happy that, they found things to be in such good order. But then they tried in multiple ways to get me to step aside from the leadership of Priests for Life. Because if they can get somebody out of a position of influence without causing too much trouble, they're always going to try that first. And in fact, isn't that what they did with Bishop Strickland? They said, well, we're going to ask you to resign. Now, he had already said publicly, he said to us privately, so if they ask me, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to step aside. They're going to have to force me out. But they tried to get me out of Priests for Life. Now, the difference between my case and Bishop Strickland, the Pope has jurisdiction over who the bishop of a diocese is. It's ultimately the Pope that appoints the bishop to the diocese or removes him. And, Bishop Strickland made it clear. It's not that the Pope doesn't have authority to do this. He does. In my case, they didn't have authority to remove me. They had no jurisdiction because we're an organization that has a board of directors, and it's not part of the juridical structure of the church. So it's like all they could do was try to persuade. Now, at one point, as we discussed in one of our program, one of the times you had me on while all that was coming out, Cardinal Dolan tried to take over our board at one point. He sent me a list of people. These people should be on your board. This should be your chairman. And I had to turn around and say to him, with all due respect, you've got no authority here. You've got no jurisdiction. It's the Board of Priests for Life that elects the Board of Priests for Life, not the Cardinal Archbishop of New York. So, and the Vatican affirmed that very clearly, too. They said, obviously, these people they have a certain level of autonomy, right? The bottom line with me, the reason, like you said, that they came down so hard and had to remove me from the priesthood altogether, is that what they first tried to do was to take Father Frank out of Priests for Life. They couldn't do that because I wouldn't leave, and there was no reason to. And so they had to take the father out of Frank, and that's what they left them no option. What they were trying to undo, again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, was the influence. If a Roman Catholic priest in good standing shows up at a conference of CPAC and says Mass there, and is encouraging these MAGA Republicans to go forward on the road to victory, They don't like that because that doesn't correspond to their politics. How are we gonna stop this priest from making it seem to these people that this is okay with the church? Well, we can tell him, he can't have that position anymore. But then none of that worked. I kept going to those events. I kept bringing that message, and so ultimately they had to take, by taking the collar away, they're distancing the church from the message that I'm there giving. Now, to their dismay, I'm still out there giving that same message, and everybody knows who I am. And so it's like, yeah, they continue to be frustrated, but there's nothing else they can do. In the case of Bishop Strickland, he's going to keep giving the message too, and he's still a bishop. So could they go to that further step? Yeah, these people are tyrants. I mean, when weaponization happens, I mean, this is the weaponization of government in the church. And just like we see the weaponization of government in the civil arena, I hope our viewers have seen the movie Police State. I don't know if you've talked about it yet on your programs, but this is a film people need to see. Police State shows all about the weaponization of government. Our friend Mark Houck and all these people, and President Trump himself. And it's like they just because weaponization is dressed up in religious garb, and conducted with religious language, doesn't make it any less weaponization and doesn't make it any less wrong. So there's no rationale. So yeah, I think they could do anything. I wouldn't put anything past them at this point.
I like your observation here that ultimately the cancellations are about prominence and influence. So,
Yes.
let's take another one out there, Father James Altman.
Right.
He was not well known. He was not even close as well known as you are. He didn't have outward independent apostolate. He didn't have videos. He made a sermon, and then he made one video initially saying, you can't vote pro-abortion, you can't vote pro-Democrat and call yourself a Catholic. And it was a short video that he made. Man, as soon as he did that, and that video went viral. I don't know how many millions of views it got, but it went viral. I remember. It was huge. Everyone was talking about it after church at coffee at every single Catholic church in America. Again, at that point, when you have that amount of influence, that's when the clock starts ticking down. That's when they put a target to your back. And same thing for him. So you were and are highly influential in the Catholic American Church, and so much so that outside of Catholicism, pro-life leaders all know Father Frank Pavone. Protestants know Father Frank Pavone. Like I explain to people, 5 years ago, you say, who's the Catholic leaders, or even the pro-life leaders in the pro-life movement? Everyone, no matter your Catholic, is going to say Father Frank Pavone. So you have this influence, and you know who else we saw this with? And they went after and just tried to get her, Mother Angelica.
Yes.
They were after her like a duck on a June bug.
And remember what she said about I had such beautiful years from '94 to the time that then she had her disability and she wasn't able to talk anymore. But I was privileged to say mass in her room. Can you imagine? I was there with a relic of the blood of John Paul II, the Holy Eucharist, and Mother Angelica. I said, "Oh my goodness, what's going on here?" But in the conversations, and she said it publicly. She said, "Yeah," she said, the bishops, they want to take over this network because, they failed at making their own, and they're envious of us," he says. "But I'll blow the whole thing up before they get their hands on it." Remember she said that?
Yeah, I remember that. But that proves your point.
Yeah.
You can be the most conservative, orthodox, whoever, right? But as soon as you get that influence and that prominence, all guns are out, all knives are out. They're going to come after you. And we see that with these cancellations, and I think that's on purpose. It's on purpose because all the U.S. bishops who maybe are starting to say, I'm going to go say something. They see a bishop fired from his diocese. They start to second guess. Well, maybe I should be quiet. I'll just work behind the scenes. I will never say anything public. I'm going to go along to get along, and that's exactly what the infiltrators and the One Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church want to achieve.
why should we live in walking on eggshells? You know, this is the sad thing about it. See, I think from the point of view, again, of most of our viewing audience right now, the faithful Catholic who's living the faith every day, making a living, doing their best, it's like they don't make these distinctions